I'm Joe Day, and I'm standing under a breadfruit tree here on Kauai. I've just met a woman who feels that the fruit that this tree and others like it produce could provide a partial answer to much of the world's hunger. She's Dr. Diane Ragoni, and she directs the Breadfruit Institute at the National Tropical Botanical Garden here. Tell me about the Breadfruit Institute.
Well, the Breadfruit Institute is a program at the National Tropical Botanical Garden on Kauai, and it was created in 2003 with the mission of promoting the conservation and use of breadfruit for food and reforestation.
Would you tell me a little bit about, and tell our listeners a little bit about what breadfruit looks like?
Well, breadfruit is a tropical tree crop, a starchy crop. So the trees are large, can be large, 30, 40 feet taller. The fruit itself is round or oval and has a green pattern on it and be spiky. And it's kind of hard to describe, but when you cut it in half, it's yellow or pale white inside. So it's really, I liken it to a potato. I like to call breadfruit a potato on a tree.
My impression is that it's sort of smaller than a soccer ball and larger than a grapefruit. Would that be correct?
That would be correct, but there are so many varieties of breadfruit we have in our breadfruit collection. It's the largest in the world. It's a conservation collection of breadfruit varieties. We have over 120 varieties. So they range in size from as small as a baseball to pretty much as large as a soccer ball. But the average size would probably be more like a grapefruit.
Tell me a little bit about the history of breadfruit in this part of the world.
Well, breadfruit has a really fascinating history. It's a true Pacific crop. It originated probably in the Western Pacific in Papua New Guinea, and its distribution and domestication of the crop is associated with the migration patterns of Pacific Islanders from the Western Pacific through Polynesia into Hawaii. So it's been in Hawaii for it's nearly 1,000 years, and it's been cultivated and used in the Pacific for 3,000 to 4,000 years or longer. Well, the history of breadfruit beyond Hawaii is also very interesting because if you've ever heard of the famous Mutiny on the Bounty, that was directly because of breadfruit. The British Empire sent out a ship captained by Captain Bligh to Tahiti to collect breadfruit to introduce to the Caribbean as a new source of food, mainly for the slave populations there and for the colonists.
What are some of the uses of breadfruit, both for people to eat and for other use?
Well, breadfruit is a multi-purpose tree. It is primarily grown for its, as I mentioned, for its fruit because it's a starchy staple carbohydrate fruit, very nutritious. But the trees also provide shade, and shade is so valuable and important, especially if you're on a little atoll island with all that sand. The trees produce a sap, a milky white sap that's sticky, so that had important uses as a glue, as a latex, to caulk canoes, and for ornamental purposes. Any of the ways you would want to use a glue. And then it has a nice lightweight timber, and the timber is used for canoes and for ornamental things and handicrafts. And then also we found that the male flowers, which are separate from the fruit, when they dry, they're burned to repel flying insects and mosquitoes. And we have done research on that to see whether that is just from the smoke chasing the insects away or whether there's some kind of active ingredient in there. We have shown that it is very effective. It may be more effective than DEET.
What does it taste like if you don't add different spices and flavors to it?
That is such a difficult question for me to answer because if someone asked me what does a potato taste like, or what does white rice taste like, or what does any other pasta taste like, I really can't describe it. They taste like pasta or potatoes or breadfruit. But it has, people say it has a bland flavor, but all of those other starchy staples do as well. But it has a different subtle flavors and textures depending on the variety. And for chefs, I've had chefs tell me they love cooking with breadfruit because of its, because it is that kind of, doesn't have a dominating flavor. They can do so much with it. And then not only is it a starchy staple, but it is a true fruit. So once it ripens, it turns soft and sweet, and at that stage it can be eaten raw or it could be used in desserts and sweets. So truly a multi-purpose fruit and a multi-purpose tree.
How do you cook breadfruit in your home?
I cook breadfruit many different ways. I tend to use it more like a potato, so I make like scallop potatoes. I'll make scallop breadfruit. The other night I made a chicken adobo dish, which is chicken which is cooked in with a vinegar and ginger and garlic and spices. And so I cut breadfruit into chunks and put that in there at the end.
One of the purposes, I gather, of the Institute and one of your goals is to convince people that this fruit could be used to alleviate hunger in the world, in the tropics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes, I've been working on breadfruit for nearly 30 years, starting with extensive field work in the Pacific Islands. I've visited over 50 islands to document and describe and collect breadfruit diversity. And in my field work, seeing in the Pacific, which has such a long history of breadfruit, seeing the value of breadfruit as a crop, seeing how breadfruit was so widely grown and it was an important part of traditional cropping systems that have been sustainable for centuries, if not millennia, seeing the productivity of breadfruit, and then putting together the collection of breadfruit and studying this, I've experienced and seen and read about breadfruit's potential. And looking at the problems around the world in the tropics in particular with hunger and the need for reliable, sustainable sources of food, I just wanted to extrapolate from the Pacific to other places. And breadfruit is already known and grown in many countries in the world. But all of these tropical countries only have one or two varieties of breadfruit, and they're not necessarily the most nutritious or the best varieties of breadfruit. So our work at the Institute has been to develop ways to propagate breadfruit on a large scale and to make high quality elite varieties of breadfruit available from our collection for tree planting projects around the world. And there are a lot of hungry people in the tropics. And in addition to that billion hungry people who just don't get enough of the necessary calories that they need in a day, there are also estimated to be about 2 billion people with hidden hunger. And hidden hunger means they may get enough calories, but they don't get the nutrients that they need. And that's one of the things we're working on, because we have varieties in our collection that we're working to distribute that are very nutrient rich, so that will not only address the issue of outright hunger, but also micronutrient deficiencies. We have received requests from nearly 60 countries, from either government agencies, from NGOs, non-governmental organizations, from farming groups, from individuals, from a myriad people wanting to get varieties from our collection.
How did you get interested in breadfruit in the first place?
It was serendipity.
Love at first sight.
No, I got interested in breadfruit. It was serendipity. I was doing my master's in horticulture at the University of Hawaii. I'd done my undergraduate in horticulture at Virginia Tech, and decided to take a class in the Pacific Island Study Program, and was interested in tropical fruits, so I wrote a term paper on breadfruit. I knew nothing about breadfruit. It's been an underutilized crop for so long, and so I would love to see scores of organizations and people and researchers working on breadfruit. And I'd like to see this work really expand and continue, because it's a perennial, long-lived tree with so many benefits, and I'd just like to see millions of breadfruit trees being planted around the world.
Under a breadfruit tree here on Kauai, for KKCR, this is Joe Day.